My name is Emma. I'm with Representative Chrissy Houlihan. She's one of the co-chairs of the UXO and Demining Caucus, along with Representative David Valadao. I think my colleague from Valadao's office, Olivia Spino, might be here, but I would like to just thank blanketly Representative Valadao for being a great champion of these programs. This caucus really works to ensure the robust congressional support for the State Department's conventional weapons destruction and related programs, including demining, UXO clearance, and weapons security. And for those of you whose bosses are not on the caucus, we'd love to have you. So please get in touch with me or Olivia about joining. I'm glad to see so many folks here today. I know it's been a crazy week. To talk about demining and the related programs that make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Last year in April, I went with Halo Trust to Somaliland, where I saw for myself the impact of this work, enabling communities to farm otherwise unusable land, supporting food security in a community largely reliant on food aid, reducing hunger, creating self-sufficiency, and stabilizing communities. Across the Horn of Africa, a region of concern of terrorism and instability, mine clearance is helping to stabilize these communities and supporting U.S. global security and counterterrorism goals. I want to acknowledge that these programs are under review by the State Department at the moment, effectively and ostensibly pausing this life-saving work. But given that these programs support the goals of making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous, we're hoping that funding will resume and organizations like our guests here will continue to have the funding that they rely on to resume the work that they do. I hope that you will consider joining Representative Houlihan and Valadao in supporting these programs in the fiscal year 2026 appropriation cycle, which will be circulating as soon as we have some more information about the fiscal year 2026 appropriation cycle. But we have a great panel of speakers today from Halo Trust, Mines Advisory Group, and Peace Trees Vietnam. But before we hear from them, we'll take a minute to hear some recorded remarks from Representatives Stephen Lynch and Young Kim, who are both members of the caucus.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Young Kim, representative of California's 48th Congressional District. I want to thank the Halo Trust and the UXO Demining Caucus for inviting me to speak on the State Department's Conventional Weapons Destruction, or CWD, programs. CWD programs help save lives, whether they are preventing weapons from falling into the wrong hands or removing landmines, explosive remnants of war, or excess weapons stockpiles. These programs improve national security, promote recovery in conflict-affected countries, and support U.S. diplomacy around the world. As chair of the East Asia and the Pacific Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I know how important humanitarian demining programs are. In Southeast Asia and the Pacific, U.S. deminers sporting American flags on their equipment are removing World War II and Vietnam War era contamination. These efforts produce tangible outcomes that directly counter the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party. As the foreign assistance review process continues, we must ensure that reforms are targeted and do not undermine programs that are essential to our national security. As I expressed during the House Foreign Affairs Committee's USAID hearing 2 weeks ago, I am concerned about reports that CCP officials have already signaled their willingness to replace demining activities across the Indo-Pacific region, including in Cambodia. So I have urged the State Department for precise and careful reforms to ensure that USAID's original mission to promote global health, food security, democratic governance, and economic prosperity continues. We must expand waivers to account for life-saving and essential programs and provide our implementing partners with clear guidance. So I hope you join me in supporting these demining programs that ultimately create a stronger, safer, and more prosperous America. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Congressman Steve Lynch from Massachusetts, 8th Congressional District. I just want to say hello to the folks from Halo Trust. I'm a member of the Congressional Oversight Committee and also a member of the Explosive Ordnance and Landmine Caucus. I've had the opportunity to lead several delegations to conflict zones from Iraq and Afghanistan. We've gone into Lebanon, Somalia, Ukraine, to look at the situation there where landmines threaten the local population. I want to thank the Halo Trust for the work that you've done in partnership with our committee and with the State Department to eliminate that hazard. Not only is it a hazard to local populations, but especially to children. A lot of these areas where landmines and anti-personnel ordinances are playgrounds for kids, virtually. They're off the beaten path. And one of the impacts that I have seen is that when a child is injured by an anti-personnel ordinance or a landmine, that conflict, that war continues, and it can be years after that particular munition was used. So just want to say thank you to the Halo Trust for the good work you've done. I know that you've got a briefing together for your members. I just want to say that your work is incredibly important, especially now that President Trump has eliminated a lot of the funding that we relied on in the past. Our partnership, yours and mine, is as important as it ever has been. So thank you again for your good work. Good luck with your conference, and let's continue to work together on this issue. Thank you.
Thanks to both Representatives Kim and Lynch for their remarks and for their dedication to these critical programs. I'm going to turn to introduce our speakers now. I'll start with Chris Watley. Chris serves as the Executive Director of Halo USA, the U.S. arm of the Halo Trust, the world's largest humanitarian mine cleaning organization. Prior to joining Halo, Chris served as the Executive Director of the United Nations Association of the United States, a program of the United Nations Foundation. Chris has also served as Program Officer and a Field Representative for the International Republican Institute. Also with us is Dave Chavez, Mine Advisory Group's Standards and Training Manager for Latin America and the Caribbean. Dave joined the U.S. Army in 2004 from his native state of Texas. He enlisted as an infantryman and deployed to Iraq in 2006, then joined EOD and deployed to Afghanistan in 2011. After Afghanistan, Dave was stationed in Egypt and then in the Washington, D.C. area with the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, where he separated from the Army after nearly 12 years of service. And lastly, we have Rebecca Giovanazzi. She has a decade of experience working in international development. She currently serves as Peacetree Vietnam's Congressional Liaison, advocating for demining programs in central Vietnam and strong U.S.-Vietnam relations. Prior to that, Rebecca collaborated with national electoral commissions to improve electoral transparency, supported feedback mechanisms to improve government service delivery, and worked with civil society organizations to advocate for locally identified priorities such as anti-corruption and disability rights. We'll start by hearing a little bit more from Chris from the Halo Trust.
Thanks for making time for this. I mean, obviously, we're going through a moment in which foreign assistance is in the news cycle and in public attention more than any time in my life, and I'm probably the oldest person in this room, so it is a unique moment. Every one of you are working in offices where you're getting constituent feedback on lots of elements of the foreign assistance agenda, and I want to thank you for just taking some time to think about conventional weapons destruction, this one kind of small but mighty element, this tool in the foreign policy toolbox. And I'm going to give you some specific examples of how I personally, and we as the Halo Trust, view it as something that advances American national interests, that contributes to making us safer, stronger, and more prosperous. But I want to pull up to 50,000 foot for just a little bit to try to put it into context. And that demining has been mentioned in a lot of news articles. It's been discussed in the context of all the different things that are happening with U.S. foreign development assistance. Well, it's important to remember it's not foreign development assistance. It's got a lot of development and humanitarian impact, but it is a U.S. security assistance instrument. The Conventional Weapons Destruction Account It's part of a larger account that has non-proliferation and other security assistance elements. And really, I think that ultimately, although all of us as professionals working for organizations that clear landmines, we approach it from the humanitarian narrative. We do this because it saves lives, and it allows kids to walk to school without blowing up. It allows refugees to return home after conflicts. It does those humanitarian things, and it does it in a way that is extremely visible and visceral in the countries in which it operates. So it has this humanitarian impact. It has this public diplomacy impact because you've got 1,000 deminers all with American flags on their shoulders and American flags on their trucks, and they're delivering this humanitarian impact in a place where US assistance is often invisible, perhaps, or very visible. But those are soft power elements. So it is a security assistance instrument with strong soft power narrative, humanitarian elements, saving lives, restoring economic livelihoods, being visible in a public diplomacy sense, but it is also a hard power security assistance dimension as well. Because the work is done alongside and in partnership with security forces in the places that we operate. We are a resource in developing relationships that are key for hard US national security priorities as well. And to give you some specific examples, so how do we make America safer? Obviously, we make a lot of people safer among the 60 million people worldwide who are affected by landmines in key countries that are important. That's how we make civilians in those countries safer. But one thing that I think is less visible, because although the majority of our funding comes from the State Department, from the Political Military Affairs Bureau, we also receive about 23 million, the sector worldwide, in US Department of Defense funding through the Army Futures Command, something called the Humanitarian Research and Development Program, where they provide equipment that we use. It helps us in our life-saving mission, but it also has this really important impact on the warfighter themselves, in that these ground-penetrating metal detectors that we have, ground-penetrating radar and metal detector kind of dual-use items called H-standards that we use in places like Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Angola. We're going to clear, as HALO, probably about 10,000 different landmines this year using those detectors alone. Every time we do it, the data on that signal, on the excavation, on the problems we had along the way, on the performance of the asset, all of that goes up on tablets. All of that goes straight to the Army Futures Command. We have Mod 1. All that data goes into Mod 2, Mod 3, the same resources that are going to be used by the warfighter in a context in which landmines, unfortunately, are being used in kinetic conflicts on a regular basis right now. So this is not a hypothetical threat that American forces might face. This is a real threat if we ever find ourselves in conflict on the Korean Peninsula or any number of places. All of that work, saving lives, using those DoD assets and reporting the results of it and improving the assets themselves, make American soldiers safer. On the stronger side, so we think about this moment that we're moving through where we have great power competition. We have a very specific set of objectives as a nation that we're pursuing vis-a-vis China and rivalry in the Pacific, which Representative Kim mentioned. Right now, one of the best assets that the United States has is addressing those legacy issues, whether it's developing a relationship in Vietnam, we'll hear more about. But for us, the example that I like to point to is the Solomon Islands. So the Battle of Guadalcanal, one of the most climactic battles of World War II, the lore of the Marine Corps is found in Guadalcanal. Why was it fought? It was fought because the Japanese wanted to build an airstrip in World War II to cut off US access to Australia. Well, 2 years ago, the Chinese signed a security agreement with the Solomon Islands. And suddenly, this place that we had not been paying attention to for 80 years, suddenly we had the prospect of being cut off in a similar way to that same threat that was faced 80 years ago in World War II. A rival power developing a security relationship that could limit our access there. And it was in that moment that the State Department decided, well, this is the time to address that legacy of unexploded ordnance that had been sitting there for 80 years, killing probably 15, 20 people every year for 80 years out of a population of 600,000. Quite frankly, of all of the HALO countries I've been to, the most extreme contamination of unexploded ordnance I've ever seen is in the Solomon Islands, and it has been there for all those years. This is something the US could do. We were able to get funding through the Countering Chinese Influence Fund, moved through the Paul Mill Bureau. We began operations within months. And now we're in a position where we can help address that legacy and at the same time advance this kind of security partnership. It was the only element of US foreign assistance that was able to get up off the ground within that first year after that security agreement was signed with China. So, it makes us stronger in developing alliances, access, relationships with militaries that we need for our own national security. And finally, just on the prosperous side, Ukraine, I think we think of it in the context of the conflict that's playing out right now and what may happen tomorrow with Zelensky's visit. But at its heart, one of the most important things to think about the Ukraine war is the world's second largest grain producer invaded the world's fifth largest grain producer. Ukraine is absolutely key for global food supply and American groceries that, quite frankly, when I'm out in our Ukraine program, you think of the Ukrainian flag. Why is it the yellow and the blue? It's the yellow is the rapeseed flowers that you see in the fields there, and the blue is the sky. It is absolutely a key element of global food production. And within days of that invasion 3 years ago, the price of vegetable oil in American supermarkets shot up by 50%. There was a real-world American family prosperity impact by that conflict. And quite frankly, the majority of the work that we're doing and our other partners is getting that ag production up and running again so that they can pay for their own war, so that they can contribute to feeding the Horn of Africa, which is their primary area that much of their food was going to, and so that global food supplies, in a moment when Americans are more worried about the price of eggs than the direction of American foreign assistance, that these are programs that have that prosperity impact in a very direct way. But let me leave it there and turn it back to our host.
Dave, we'd love to hear about MAG's work and the work that you've done on the ground.
Again, thank you everybody for being here. My name is Dave Chavez, and I'm a field guy. I want to tell you a little bit about our weapons and ammunition management programs. They are the prevention to safety and security. So what does that mean? What does a WAM program do? Because I understand, people understand the words, but what does it really mean? So what we do is we assess a country's ammunition depots and their armories. We want to know what status they're in for two reasons: to avoid theft or to prevent theft, and to avoid unplanned explosions. As we've heard many times a year happen, and even more times we don't hear about it, but it happens every year. And who's affected? The communities that live around these areas. The civilians, not just the soldiers or police that live around these barracks, but civilians, they're the ones affected by these unplanned explosions. So what we do is we assist them in the training with our knowledge and capability to show them how to better manage their stocks, again, and reducing the risk of theft. So when we talk about theft in armories, I'm not just talking about, oh, there's a few pistols, a few guns, a few rounds of ammunition that could go missing. We're talking about millions of rounds that could possibly go missing and be used for illicit activities. I'll give you an example of some of the things I've seen. I've gone into an armory, and think of it as a junk drawer where you have your stuff scattered everywhere. But what if I told you everything in that junk drawer is made to kill or hurt somebody? So I need you to keep accountability of everything in that junk drawer. Could you do that now in your junk drawer? Just think about it. So think this at a larger scale with sensitive items, explosives, weapons, ammunition. That's the kind of things that we're trying to assist them and help them to better their inventory control. So yes, I talked about little bullets, maybe a gun or two. In theory, I mean, how big of a difference does one or two bullets make if they're lost? I already mentioned the millions that can be lost. I want to talk about one thing in specific. I don't know if anybody's heard of MANPADS, or Man Portable Air Defense Systems. What is this? This is a weapon that one person, or a group of three, depending on the model, can look up in the sky and take out a commercial, not only a military plane, but a commercial plane. We all like to travel. Nobody wants to be in fear that if the country I'm going to could potentially get blown out of the sky. So what we do is we assist to make sure those weapons are secure, or if no longer in use, destroyed. In these programs, a lot of the times, like I've explained the why and the what, but I want to explain a little bit more on the why in sense of access. What do we do in these type of programs is we provide the State Department, through our embassies, the access to the right people that we build relationships with. Because as everybody knows, it's not simply enough to send the message. You have to have an ear that will listen. So by having the access to that person to say, hey, let me introduce you to my contact in the embassy. They'd really like to talk to your general because they're the right person that'll listen. And that's what these kind of programs do. They give the access to our partners in the State Department. And that's a little bit about what a WHAM program does.
Thank you all for coming. Echoing my colleagues' remarks, I know it's a busy time and we appreciate you coming and listening and hopefully learning more or learning more in depth. I want to put a human face to what we're facing right now. We've heard a lot about soft power, hard power, WHAMs. I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, all of this has an impact, not just on folks around the world, but people you may already know. So Peace Trees Vietnam is the only US-based mine action organization. We were founded in 1995 by a Gold Star family, initially as a reconciliation effort between US veterans and Vietnam veterans, bringing together veterans from both sides to plant trees in Quang Tri province, which the DMZ of Vietnam, the demilitarized zone, runs through the top of. When they got there in 1995, they were unable to plant trees together because unexploded ordnance littered the ground. That kind of led to Peace Trees' name. It's a bit of a misnomer. Most of our work is mine action, and the rest of it is post-clearance economic development programs, returning the land to productive use. Over the past 30 years, US veterans have continued to support Peace Trees as donors, board members, on citizen diplomacy trips, and reconciliation efforts. But we have 300 miners in two provinces in Vietnam. Over 30 years, we've cleared over 10,000 acres of land, over 155,000 unexploded pieces of ordnance, and returned all of those acres to productive use, either to kindergartens, community centers, agricultural programs, or as a place to plant trees for veterans. I think it's important to also talk about how the stop work orders have affected work on the ground. All of us have received stop work orders since January. Some of us have received waivers, some of us haven't. But it's important, I feel like, to highlight what actually happens when you receive a stop work order and what happens on the ground. It means that our 300 deminers are not able to go out and clear ordnance. It means the hotline we operate is unable to be operated. There's no one out there able to go out and to respond to calls. We work closely with the Quang Tri Mine Action Center, a Vietnamese-led center in the province of Quang Tri, to respond to calls to provide immediate guidance to communities about what to do when you find unexploded ordnance. And then Peace Trees sends out one of our demining groups to either dismantle the bomb in situ, or if it's safe enough to be moved to a safe place to detonate it. We actually had about 2 weeks ago an incident that happened that we were unable to respond to. A family in Cam Lo, just outside of the main city in Quang Tri province, was digging a gravesite for their family member with a backhoe and found a stockpile of 35 unexploded ordnances. They called the Quang Tri Mine Action Center, who was able to provide guidance on how to safely rope off the area, to educate your neighbors on to avoid the area, but ultimately we weren't able to respond to it because of the stop work orders. And this is something we see frequently, every day, and will continue to happen, and we'll be unable to respond to if this work does not continue to be funded and supported. Our work goes back 30 years, and so does the State Department's. The State Department has worked in Vietnam to clear unexploded ordnance in Quang Tri province since 1994. Since 2000, we've reduced the number of incidences of accidents in Quang Tri province from hundreds a year to almost zero. And I think this highlights 30 years of great collaboration with the Vietnamese government. Peace Trees works directly with VUFO, the Vietnamese Union of Friendship Organizations. We work with the Department of Foreign Affairs. We work with the Quang Tri Mine Action Center closely every day in communities to clear this work, and that in turn contributes to the U.S. and Vietnam's comprehensive strategic partnership. In fact, this year marks 50 years of collaboration between Vietnam and the U.S. And in addition to that, Vietnam has come out multiple times, including their Minister of Defense, to say that cooperation with the U.S. hinges on war legacy issues, and that cannot continue if work on the ground cannot continue as well. So I just want to leave you all with a story. It happened before the stop work orders, but I feel like really highlights the human element of this work. In November, we received a call in Quang Binh province, where we work with MAG, about a bomb that was found by fishermen in their trap in the water. This is a good example because a lot of times folks, despite the work being done for so long, don't often know that landmines are there, that unexploded ordnance is still there. A lot of times it's effectively, I guess the word for it is uncovered during a weather event or erosion, or when a backhoe is used to dig a burial site. This group of folks found it in the water. They actually had wanted to dismantle it themselves to sell for scrap metal. Scrap metal sales are a quite easy way for families who are struggling to get quick cash in Vietnam, but at the same time, dismantling a UXO by yourself without international training is quite dangerous. So luckily, when they got it to the shore, they called Peace Trees. We were able to go out and defuse it. And I just wanted to share with you the fisherman's words. We were able to be in contact with him and talk him through the situation to safely get our team in place. Later he said, "I couldn't sleep the entire night after learning the bomb still contained live submunitions. I made a serious mistake by bringing it home, unknowingly putting my family and neighbors at great risk. I'm deeply thankful to the team for removing the bomb quickly and safely. From now on, I will encourage everyone to report explosive ordinances to authorities immediately for proper handling." Even decades after the Vietnam War, I know most of us weren't around at that time, war legacies are still out there. They're still harming people every day, even in areas such as Vietnam, and we appreciate your support. So thank you.
Questions now. If anybody has a question for one of our panelists, feel free to raise your hand.
Come on, somebody. Thank you.
I know Halo is also trying to expand their efforts into places like Kiribati and then also Papua New Guinea. I'm wondering, obviously everything's up in the air with foreign funds freeze, but besides that, what kind of work is was already ongoing in those regions? I know you guys had plans to start certain things, but I'm wondering what those first steps that have been taken have been.
Thank you. Well, we had just received approval from the State Department to open a program in Papua New Guinea and had received some private funding to try to make it even more cost effective for state. So that one's ready to go. And luckily, we could still stand that one up fast if we get approval to do so. Kiribati, we had done two different reconnaissance visits there. And it's a unique one in that the nature of that battle was on a very, very concentrated small island where 50% of the country's population lies. You could actually clear all of that contamination in a relatively quick amount of time and have a very high humanitarian impact. It, like the Solomons, has signed a security agreement with the Chinese, and actually the closest land point to Pearl Harbor is part of Kiribati. It's still a long way, it's the Pacific, so it's about 1,200 miles from the most distant airstrip in Kiribati and Pearl Harbor. The Chinese have talked about redeveloping that airstrip, which was built in World War II. So once again, we want to say this is something you can do. This is something that the Kiribati government has asked for. Once again, it's people living on top of bombs, people dying from bombs for 80 years. You can get rid of them. And in fact, there it's particularly egregious in that, you know, it's a place where the land's disappearing fast. So the population is concentrating more and more in areas that are particularly contaminated. And in fact, there's an old Japanese bunker where when they find these unexploded bombs and move them the way that the fishermen did in the Vietnam example, they're all packing them in this one bunker, which is also next to the fresh water supply for the island and the one power plant. So if that bunker goes up, it has a tremendous impact on the whole country.
This investment in mine clearance in places like Cambodia, what are the consequences of China filling the aid gap left by the United States? And what makes demining programs different than, U.S. demining programs different than Chinese demining programs?
Can I take this?
I can speak to it. We don't cover Cambodia, but I have worked there. And then if you want to follow up, if you want to. Okay. I mean, I think first and foremost, the most important thing to remember is when China steps in for development aid, they predicate it on their workers and their labor and their materials being used. I think the first thing to remember is that a lot of us work with a focus on localization. So focusing on employing local staff members, using local resources, or in a lot of ways adhering to the U.S.'s FAA requirements. So the set of U.S. regulations that requires a certain level of resources being from the U.S. That's one, I think, example. The second example is that this often takes away agency from people in the communities. It's very important to work in, like I highlighted it earlier, work with local government, work with local communities to take agency of this work themselves. So eventually it will be turned over. So while not Cambodia, Vietnam has a very close relationship in part with the CCP, and removing aid from that as well will also have consequences on U.S.'s foreign relations with Vietnam.
Good question. Well, first of all, I would say U.S. leadership has been very effective in leveraging contributions from other donors, particularly European donors. So on that level, just in terms of working with other European partners, the U.S. continuing to have a seat at the table and being the global mine action leader is key to ensure that European nations continue to contribute and leverage that leadership. Specifically in like the former Yugoslav states, we have a program in Kosovo where we're clearing legacy contamination from 1999, so US dropped cluster munitions and things like that. Kosovo is probably one of the countries that's going to become absolutely clear of munitions in a couple of years if we can just keep the funding flowing for that period of time. And that's one of the nice things about this work is that yes, it takes a long time, definitely, but when it's done, it's done. You know, Mozambique was the last country to go mine-free in 2015. The mines don't come back once you get them out of the ground. So yes, Kosovo, Bosnia, Croatia, these are all places that have their own levels of contamination. I think for Halo, Kosovo would be the one we operate in.
And to build off of that, I was just wondering, do you guys do other kinds of advocacy, you know, in terms of like, you know, promoting the elimination of mine warfare, just as a general idea or practice?
Halo does not, in that we are very focused narrowly on being an operator. Mag, I think that you received you were part of the Nobel Prize winning group from the 90s, but
I couldn't speak much to that level. Sorry, I'm more of the, like I said, I'm more of the field, but we can get back to you if you want more information on that.
Thank you.
I guess rather the question is, are there other places that have these same kind of minefield problems that the CCP is planning to either target next or are already trying to invest in outside of the ones you've already mentioned? Or does it seem to be a little more concentrated in those Pacific nations where it's a little more strategically close from like a geographic perspective towards the US?
my experience has been Southeast Asia, and I think it's a relatively new development. certainly in the other areas where we are operating and intersecting with Chinese influence, it's mainly Belt and Road infrastructure initiatives. And in part because the US is not going to compete on it with its checkbook on sort of those major infrastructure projects. Our work is actually a good counter narrative. It's not, we're not preventing that infrastructure from going in, but, whereas the Chinese encumber an asset, a port in Sri Lanka, very specific example where the Chinese invested in the port, it proved economically unviable and then they repossessed the port. The work that MAG and HALO does in Sri Lanka, we take whole areas that have been locked away from economic output for 20, 30 years, and we say, this is yours free of debt and danger. That's a great, counter narrative to, we're gonna take your port and we're gonna own it in perpetuity.
How many people are affected by this? How much area is affected by this? And what level has been shut off due to unexploded ordinances?
People, the UN statistics are 60 million people worldwide. It's growing, unfortunately, in part, not just Ukraine, but there are more people who died in Ethiopia because of landmines from the Tigray conflict than even in Ukraine. There are probably more people dying in Myanmar right now because of landmines than in Ukraine. So they're Sudan. Unfortunately, we're in this. I kind of feel like the treaty was really important and powerful in the 90s, and it achieved a lot. But the nature of conflict and the direction of the world right now is kind of breaking out of the treaty, and the use of landmines are growing. So yes, you've got the legacy conflicts like Vietnam, like the Solomon Islands, and what's great about them is they truly are. That's once you clear them, they're gone. But we do have these active conflicts where you have, recently produced, recently laid landmines that are adding to the problem.
A little bit to the impact of the foreign aid freeze on your projects long term, and if there are any programs that you think would be, number one or number two on your list for getting a waiver that hasn't already been granted one.
Yeah, I can take first. So we only work in 2 provinces in Vietnam, Quang Tri and Quang Binh. We've received waivers for both. However, the language is a little odd, so to speak, in that it's not clear when a review will happen. We still haven't been able to access funding, so while we have received a waiver, we haven't been able to resume work because no funding has been released. But I think something that's really important is because, like you said, Vietnam is a legacy, there has been work going on for 30 years. And we had targeted to clear all the ordnance in Quang Tri province to a safe level by 2035. Now that number is very contingent on staffing numbers, on demining efforts, on funding. So as the freeze goes on, or if funding ultimately is terminated, that number the land may never be returned fully to productive use. 2035 will come and go, and legacies of war will still remain in the ground. That being said, we do have the goal of this year clearing 1 district in the province fully, which would be a first. And we've been working with other organizations in the government to pin down similar goals for other provinces in Vietnam.
In terms of global impact, so on January 23rd, HALO had 12,000 deminers operating in about 30 countries. We've had to stand down 3,500 of those. Among priority countries, Laos would be our top. So 1,200 of those would be Laos. And we have, like Peace Trees, we received some limited waivers, but just they don't access the major grants that we have. So in principle, the State Department wants operators to begin work in Laos, but because the way the waivers were structured, we're not able to access the funds to stand up those deminers. So that would be priority 1 for me to stand up in Laos.
I think a little bit as far as Latin America and Caribbean go, a lot of what we do, especially in the WAM, is either construction or refurbishment. So specifically, construction can take a matter of months. So when we have a stop and a waiver for maybe a couple of months or a month, it really makes it hard to do anything because you don't have the time to complete it or the funds to complete it in that time. So I think it's very important to know what's going to happen in the future. And if it is terminated, you have to remember that at the beginning, you always have startup costs, so the younger programs have a little bit longer to catch up, and as the legacy, the longer programs that we have more momentum, so they're easier to open doors in certain countries. So I think that's something to note as well.
Discussion and on the crucial role of demining and weapons security programs. The United States is the largest funder of conventional weapons destruction programs, so, and we heard today that the foreign aid freeze has been pretty dramatic on these efforts, had a dramatic toll on the efforts. We thank you guys for being here today. I hope that you walk away from this briefing with an understanding of how conventional weapons destruction work saves lives and is an essential tool in making America stronger, safer, and creating a world where America can prosper. If you have any other follow-up questions, or if you'd like to add your boss to the UXO and Demining Caucus, please feel free to get in touch with me or my colleague Olivia Spino in Representative Aladeo's office.